I took care of blind Stephen for 3 years. After he regained his sight, he lost his memory due to the surgery and forgot about me. I tried every means but still couldn't make him remember. Just when I was about to give up, I overheard him talking to his childhood sweetheart. I naturally have to pretend to have amnesia. Otherwise, she might blackmail me with kindness. I don't know how she would do it. I am the crown prince of the Gu family after all. How can I marry such a lowly woman? Standing at the door of the ward. My hands are full of blisters from scalding while making porridge. After Stephen regained his sight, he needed a light diet for a period of time. And in order to make him regain his memory, I brought him food day after day. But he still loathed me as always and sneered at what I said. Can you cook? Just the daughter of a nanny. Putting on airs as a girlfriend and demanding things from me? Who gave you the nerve? Mia, don't you believe your own lies after telling so many? I was so shocked that I looked at him in a trance. Winning the favor of the crown prince of the Gu family is something that many people can't even dream of, including me. But obviously, during the 3 years when I took care of him, it was he who took the initiative to approach me. With gauze wrapped around his eyes, he groped for my hand and smiled gently. Did you think I wouldn't know you got scalded if you didn't speak? You made a small sound and I heard it. What a soft pair of hands. How can they give me such a comfortable massage? I slapped his hand away and pretended to be fierce, to get rid of that clingy woman who is always thinking about other people's husbands. A trace of hesitation flashed across Leo's face. Is this okay? She didn't do anything to me? At this time, I didn't want to say these words to embarrass him. In the end, Stephen said dejectedly, Do you despise me for being blind, Mia? My heart was suddenly struck. Now, all these have become sharp weapons that he stabs at me viciously. I originally ran away in dejection. Every day, my confidence was shattered. I picked up my self-esteem and love in tears and faced him again. I was already used to it. Unexpectedly, when I forgot to take the thermos and turned back to the ward, I would hear him say these words. I opened the door. Cherry, a fair and delicate little girl, with a sweet smile, was lying on Stephen's hospital bed and talking to him. When she heard the sound and turned to see me, her expression was only stunned for a moment, and then she continued to smile like a flower. As if saying, I don't know if she heard it or not. So what if she did? And Stephen was the same. He paused for a moment and then said, Don't take it. Don't do it tomorrow either. Even a small restaurant is better than what you make. It turns out that in his heart, he thinks the same as Cherry. I can't see my own face. Presumably it is extremely pale. I don't care if I can become Mrs. Gu and be with Stephen in the future. I just want to ask, was the friendship of those 3 years real, or was it just my wishful thinking? I stood up shakily, facing Stephen's indifferent and mocking eyes, and said, I just want to congratulate you on finally being able to see the maple leaves turn red again. During Stephen's blindness, he sighed about going to see the red maple leaves on Fragrant Hill with me every year, saying that he was afraid there would be no such opportunity again. At that time, I stubbornly pulled him, who was out of control emotionally, back to the wheelchair from the ground. Rubbing my wrist that was almost crushed and said, Stephen, you will definitely be able to see again. I believed he would regain his sight more than I believed we could be together. Stephen's expression finally showed a moment of fragmentation. I put down the thermos, lowered my head, and slowly walked out of Stephen's ward. A voice came from behind, Do you think she gave up? Whether she gives up or not, what's the difference? The male voice came coldly. If she is shameless, will the result be different? Cherry coughed with a smile, laughing so hard that the whole corridor could hear it. It was like a cold arrow piercing my heart. I walked slowly, and finally absurdly laughed at myself. I returned home. When having a meal, my wrist began to ache faintly again. I tidied up the house for my mother who was on vacation. Then I went to a small room of mine in the Gu family. While applying cold compress to my wrist as the traditional Chinese medicine doctor said, I searched for information about going abroad on the internet. The wrist injury was an old one left from taking care of Stephen and never got better. And the offer for a prestigious graduate school that I put aside 3 years ago will undoubtedly not be sent to me again. I signed up for a language test and prepared professional documents until midnight. Until Mrs. Gu came to knock on my door. Mia, let's talk. Mrs. Gu didn't look very well. Because recently in the social circle, there are rumors that Stephen is ungrateful. Back then, the entire Gu family was about to give up on him. Mrs. Gu herself was in poor health and went abroad for recuperation. The mistress and illegitimate child were running around in the Gu family. It was me who pulled Stephen back from hell. Now, he wants to marry Cherry. He is eager to draw a clear line from me regardless of everything. This is a school in Australia. After you finish studying, you can go to work in this institution. The lifelong benefits are very good. Don't come back again. Mrs. Gu looked indifferent. At last, she took one more look at me and smiled. Mia, your mother may not be able to afford to send you to this school even if she earns money all her life. One should be content. I took a breath. Give me some time. I will go to the country and school I want to go to. You don't have a choice. I can't let Tinger regret and find you again. You will go here. I smiled uglily. I stayed behind to take care of him back then and gave up my favorite major. But not everything you want can be given. Mrs. Gu looked at me like looking at an ant. She continued to push the passport and documents forward condescendingly. Just like, you still want Tinger. Are you worthy? I looked at her without moving. This person in front of me is like two different people compared to the woman who hugged me and cried when she just came back from abroad and wanted to kneel down and thank me. Mrs. Gu took a breath and went out. Go to bed early, Mia. The plane in a week. You need to be prepared. 2 days later. Stephen was discharged from the hospital. My mother's illness is not a simple one. I went to the hospital today and got her pathological section. Well, it's malignant. I walked into the Gu family in a trance. Stephen took off the hospital gown he had worn for several years. The whole person was full of vigor and vitality. His tall and slender figure stood in the middle of the living room. One hand was interlocked with Cherry's fingers, and the other was inserted into his trouser pocket. His eyes were as if looking down on the world. Seeing me come in, he gave a sarcastic smile, and then his expression cooled down. Really, anyone can enter the main hall now. Just because you did what a nanny should do, you think you are the master. I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my heart. Because I suddenly remembered that when I entered the ward just now, I saw my mother was brushing Doreen. I don't know what news she saw. Her eyes were red, and her lips were tightly pursed and trembling, as if she was holding back tears. I am like her in temperament, gentle and forbearing, and don't like to talk. At this time, I raised my head and looked at Stephen. For 1 second, 2 seconds. I said softly, the nanny took care of you a little and you love her. Your love is so cheap, Stephen. Stephen was stunned, as if he didn't react for a moment. A slap came whistling. It was only when my face started to burn that I realized that Cherry had come over and slapped me hard. It seems that you really don't understand what you are. The delicate little girl's eyes were full of coldness. She looked at me with a smile and said, What? Are you going to call the police? But I only subconsciously raised my eyes and looked at Stephen not far away. When I was a child, my mother took me and left far away alone in order to escape from my father. After Mrs. Gu gave birth, she suffered from depression and couldn't do too heavy work. Her spirit became more and more empty. The appearance of my mother and me gave her a feeling of being able to save ordinary people to some extent. Therefore, she approved me to stay by my mother's side and took care of us a lot in daily life. Although sometimes it was condescending care, my mother and I were still grateful. Stephen and Cherry were very close before the accident. The little girl was proud and naughty and loved to tease me. He didn't scold her either. He just sneered coldly, Do you think bullying others with power is quite charming? Cherry immediately wilted. After that, she was not without hostility towards me, but she never did it again. Now, Stephen was playing with the goblet in his hand. Slowly, he put it down, pulled out a smile, and didn't even look at me. If a dog at home barks at its owner, kicking is considered light. I stared at him for a few seconds. I didn't even hear what Cherry said sarcastically in front of me. Half an hour later, I came down dragging my suitcase. "What are you doing?" Cherry shouted. Her wide-eyed look was just like seeing me stealing from her house. The man next to her also suddenly stopped his action of picking up food. He frowned lazily and looked at me. I smiled faintly. "My mother's luggage. I'm going to arrange for her hospitalization. Young master, young lady, enjoy your meal slowly." I entered the Gu family at the age of 5 and left at the age of 24. In 19 years, I never called him young master once. I walked out of the villa. Behind me came the sound of chopsticks dropping and the obsequious apologies of other servants. It has nothing to do with me anymore. Yes, I took away not only my mother's luggage. I rented a small house near the hospital and borrowed a friend's ID card so that the Gu family couldn't find me. In a week, it was enough for me to complete school applications, transfer my mother to another hospital, and escape to a small town and wait for my CAS to be issued. In these years when I took care of Stephen, I never stopped practicing languages. In my spare time, I helped people tutor papers. I also had some savings. After the exam, the cold wind in the autumn evening made me shiver. A car slowly pulled up in front of me. A handsome but slightly sinister face appeared in front of me and asked, "Oh, little Mia, where are you going?" "I heard that my aunt is looking for you." The illegitimate child of the Gu family, Kevin, who is 2 years younger than Stephen. He grew up in another province since childhood and had no worries about food and clothing, but he didn't develop an elegant temperament. When Stephen regained his sight, what he and his mother were most worried about were him and his mother. Secondly, it was the young woman who was raised in a mountain villa on the outskirts and had just given birth to a son who was just 1 year old. Chairman Gu didn't live like a modern man whether before or after Stephen lost his sight. Kevin bounced around in the Gu family for 2 years and called Mrs. Gu aunt one mouthful at a time. Also, Mom, little Mom. Back then, he bounced in front of the blind Stephen, snatched my job, and shouted that he wanted to feed his brother and show filial piety to his brother. Feeding was a small matter, but in fact, he was taking the opportunity to satirize Stephen as a useless person. Stephen, with his eyes covered, was so angry that his face turned pale and he was trembling all over. Normally, I couldn't do much. But at that time, I suddenly had an idea and started to communicate with Stephen in French. The handsome man was slightly stunned. Then, slowly and gradually, he pulled out a bitter but carefree smile, and laughed louder and louder. He understood. I was saying that even if he was blind, the culture and upbringing in his mind could not be stolen by anyone. Stephen was definitely not a waste. Stephen was sitting in a wheelchair, very embarrassed. But he showed me a warm smile and said to me in French, "Mia, I love you." Beside him, Kevin looked at us like a fool. After a full 5 minutes, he realized that he had been tricked. Kevin jumped and cursed, and dragged my hair to the steps. "Damn it. If I can't deal with him, can't I deal with you? You bitch," humiliating me. Before his slap fell, the sound of a wheelchair came. "Even if I'm blind, I still have money," Stephen said with a slight tilt of his head, full of cold arrogance. "If you dare to touch her, I'll make you die without a whole body. Anyway, it's death. Dragging you down with me, I don't lose out." Kevin didn't dare to lay a hand on me after all. Stephen pulled me over at that time. His hand trembled as he stroked my scalp that was pulled and hurt. Choking with sobs, he said, "It's my fault. I will definitely eat well, rest well, and prepare for the next operation. Mia, I will definitely work hard for us." It was from that time on that Stephen, who had been self-destructive and refused to cooperate, finally began to pick himself up slowly. Now, Kevin, this clown, has danced in front of me again. But there is no one in front of me anymore. I bent down, took a breath, and suddenly hurriedly grabbed his sleeve and shouted at him, "Second young master, how can Stephen ignore me? He can't be ungrateful. Can you tell him for me? Cherry doesn't like having children. I'll give birth to one for him." Just like his father, giving me a building and a piece of land is enough. Then our mother and son can live. Second young master, please tell him for me. Kevin's eyes were just like he had provoked a lunatic. My importunate appearance touched the chord he loathed the most. He blurted out a damn it, shook me off forcefully, stepped on the gas pedal and left. I was almost pushed to the ground. I curved my lips and picked up the admission ticket. Only then did I notice that not far away, a handsome young man was driving a car, chewing gum, half smiling as he watched this scene with great interest. My heart fluttered slightly. I got on the bus, hoping that I could leave smoothly in a week. 3 days later, the language test results came out. I quickly sent an email and the offer came as promised. After several days of not sleeping well, I finally let out a long sigh of relief. If it weren't for my beloved Major supporting me, I'm really afraid I couldn't hold on. After 3 years of getting along day and night, I even slept in the same bed with Stephen. Now the man I love deeply suddenly turns against me and cuts off his beloved first. This feeling of being a joke makes me unable to sleep at night. It hurts. How can my heart not hurt? Once I finish crying, there will be no more tears. So I cry heartily. After crying, I'll do whatever I should. My mother's illness requires targeted drugs. Later, it may cost 10,000 yuan every few days. If I fall, she will be gone. I can't fall. The Gu family looks down on me, so I beg them to be kind and let me go. I didn't expect that Mrs. Gu could be so petty. Stephen and Cherry's engagement banquet was grand and the time was chosen on the day when Mrs. Gu asked me to go to Australia. After getting through this day, maybe everything will be fine. My mother coughed violently. I took the prescription and went downstairs to buy medicine. Staring at the report of the century engagement banquet of the Gu family and the Tsin family on TV, my heart was like being cut by a knife. With a wry smile, I turned and entered the alley, but was knocked unconscious by a blow from a club. When I woke up, Kevin was smoking while wearing only a bath towel and making a phone call. Auntie, are you sure? Does your son really have no feelings for this woman? Aren't you afraid that you're breaking up a loving couple? He glanced at me sideways. Even when he saw that I was awake, he was still fearless. Instead, he felt even more excited. You and Stephen are brothers and rivals. Whether he loves Mia or not doesn't matter. In any case, he can't love her. Since you like her, then I'll leave her to you. You also help me test whether Ting really has no feelings for her. I understood everything. These lunatics. I couldn't help shaking all over and instinctively begged for mercy. I'll listen to you. I'll go to Australia. Don't let him come over now. Mia. This is just a test. My days of escape were just like a clown acting under her watch. Oh, brother, are you busy? Look who this is. Kevin laughed maliciously and turned on the video. In the picture, Stephen was in a suit and was having his tie tied by someone else. I rushed over and snatched the phone. Stephen, save me. Your mother. In my panic, I didn't care about any dignity. No matter how ugly the world is, it has nothing to do with me. I want to live well first. The tall man glanced here indifferently and finally chuckled. After restraining himself a little, he said softly, the choice my mother gave you is already very good. I know everything. Mia, if you still don't understand, then I'll say one last thing to you. You and Kevin are quite a match. I mean, in terms of status. Following him may be the best ending for you, even better than going to Australia. Sorry, Mia. I was good to you when we were kids. When we grow up, you should also learn some truths. Mia. Goodbye. This is the most words Stephen has said to me since he regained his sight. It's not a cold sarcasm, but it's more like a sharp weapon than any words before, piercing my heart. The snatched phone fell to the ground. Kevin swallowed hard, hung up the phone and pounced on me. I closed my eyes. These were the 10 seconds when I felt the coldest to the bone. The door was opened. Mrs. Gu, who was always proud and noble, appeared in front of me and said indifferently, that's enough. That day, the weather was extremely fine. In the evening, an hour before the engagement banquet started, the sunset glow in the high sky outside the hotel window was as red as fire. Wouldn't it be better to go to Australia obediently early like this? For your mother's illness, the medicine will be taken care of by me from now on. You can still come back to see her from time to time. Mia, Mrs. Gu looked at her watch and her gaze became gentle and loving. Auntie is doing this for Ting's good. Here, Auntie apologizes to you. Kevin angrily got up. You guys are fucking playing with me again? Yes, if Steven hadn't had an accident, the Gu family would never fall into the hands of this idiot. I pulled up my clothes in a mess and stood up. I felt that no matter how I walked, it was wrong. When I passed by Mrs. Gu, I smiled. I really regret it. In the past 3 years. Finally, I regretted it. In less than an hour, my phone, documents, and the visa that I would have had a hard time getting were safely in my hands. In the video call, my mother tried her best not to cry and just said with red eyes, Mia, study hard, live. That's good. Her lips trembled a little and she continued, it's my fault. I shouldn't have brought you here. What's her fault? I hugged my coat tightly and tightly held a large amount of foreign currency cash that someone handed to me. The words popped out one by one from between my teeth, Mom, I'm leaving first. Wait for me to come back and see you. Okay, see you during the spring festival. My mother is as strong as I am. I haven't seen a woman more optimistic than her in this world. I smiled. An hour before boarding the plane, my phone kept ringing. I recognized that it was Steven's number. Those 11 digits that I had known by heart for the past 19 years. I don't know what he wants to say. I don't want to listen anymore. There's nothing wrong with Australia. There's nothing wrong with marrying someone else. And living a life without him is the same. It's just that none of these are what I want. I pulled out the SIM card and threw it under the plane. A young man with white hair on his head passed by. His slender and beautiful fingers were also holding a small SIM card, and he threw it down in the same place. Goodbye to this shitty place. I'm leaving, dude. He made a shooting motion, and his school bag hit me on the head. Hey! He looked at me covering my head with a blank expression. Suddenly, he seemed extremely surprised. He jumped 3 steps away. Finally, he approached and had a look of wanting to apologize but not knowing how to start. Sister, are you going to Australia too? By the way, my name is Leo. Leo gave a shy and brilliant smile. Suddenly, he extended his hand to me. Can we get to know each other? My phone was still vibrating. The man I have known for 19 years, the man who is almost engraved in my bones. What else can he say to me now? I lowered my head dully, blacklisted WeChat as well. Without raising my head, I said hoarsely, no. Then I passed by him. The plane took off. During the long international flight, Leo sat behind me and constantly cleared away all impolite and uncomfortable obstacles for me. He was as enthusiastic as a dog. I was wearing a coat several sizes too large that I didn't know who gave me. I didn't move for several hours. Finally, in a daze, I remembered he seemed to be the kid who sneered at me in luxury car when I was entangled with Kevin. His hair wasn't white back then. I had a very long dream. In the dream, I'd been in love with Steven since childhood but dared not say love. Only showed it in actions. My mother must have seen through my thoughts. At first, she told me to take care of Gu family's only heir. During adolescence, sometimes when she was picking vegetables, she'd joke with me about which girl Steven would find. Must be from good family. Later in college, she taught me studying changes destiny. The starting point of others is unreachable for us. I became more restrained. The 3 years when Steven was blind were my last chance. Didn't expect anything but was skinned and heartbroken. Mom, I finally understand. Studying abroad is extremely difficult. Foreign land, loneliness, heavy academic load. Unexpectedly, Leo is also in this school. In a not-so-reputable major. Saw him at Chinese international students' party. He was leaning against sofa chatting. Girl next to me said he's son of wealthy man's original wife. Asked if I'd get to know him. I touched phone. Inside were foreign literatures about mom's illness and Leo's voice messages. Shook my head. Wealthy and marriage have nothing to do with me. Next second, girl left. Young man stood in front of me. Said I'm amazing. His major is crap. Asked where I live. I asked if he found where I live. He pursed lips then smiled. Asked what hair color I like. I want him farther away. Didn't want to pay attention. After a few steps, replied. Life is predetermined. No future with others. Leo, don't look for me if playing. Added another sentence. A woman who is not even looked up to by a bastard of the Gu family. I don't believe you are serious. I'm very busy. So, please do me a favor. Perhaps it was because my eyes were rather lonely and plain when I left. When I finished taking a bath at night, I received another voice message from this person. Sister, no one has predetermined my life. No one cares about me. I simply don't have the right to look down on others. I remembered what the girl said. This person is the son of the original wife of a certain wealthy man. Then how could he be so bad? Just lying. Too lazy to coax him, I went to the desk again and looked up information about my mother's illness. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed. The friend request approval message about Stephen in my phone changed from once a day at the beginning to once a week. He didn't seem to bother to send me any messages at all. In the last request, there were a few words, Christmas will pass. On the evening of the 24th, at Fran's restaurant. None of my business. That day. At dusk, after the big class ended, I walked out with a group of students. Under a tall plane tree covered with snow, a man was leaning against a car, smoking a cigarette. Stephen. I blinked. Suddenly, all my senses of warmth and coldness disappeared. It wasn't until he looked over that I went forward and greeted him. Mr. Gu. Stephen's smoking movement paused. He looked at me deeply for a while. After a long time, he said, during my blindness, Kevin did a lot of things. For a whole 3 years, it was already irreversible. Both the Gu family and my grandfather gave up on me. I couldn't make any decision against them at that time. Mia, during the 3 years of blindness, I experienced the warmth and coldness of human relationships. I said that I would work hard for us. This is an explanation? An explanation that is half a year late? My whole heart seemed to be grabbed by someone, so tight that I couldn't breathe. I was so eager to know that answer before. Now, suddenly, I don't dare to know it anymore. Oh. So? Stephen, however, said no more. He took a step back, gracefully opened the car door, and his gaze was gentle. Let's go have a meal. Christmas is the biggest festival here, Mia. What's this all about? At this moment, suddenly 2 people came one after the other. Cherry was wearing a western dress and walked from behind with a sullen face. She opened the back door. Stephen was startled and turned around to see her. And Leo also came running over breathlessly, still with an exuberant sister. Stephen's expression changed several times. Finally, he pulled Cherry over with his arm and said softly, knowing she's here, I called her over to have a meal together. Didn't you say that the assistant following her is not familiar with the local area? Then Mia must be familiar. I watched this scene helplessly and suddenly became speechless. I am naturally familiar with the local area. So once Cherry comes over, I have to put aside my status as young Master Gu's underground ambiguous object and instantly turn into their nanny in a foreign land? Stephen may not have intended to humiliate me at the beginning. He may even have been trying to protect me so that I wouldn't be too embarrassed. But when will this embarrassment end? He wants to rely on the power of his mother's family and surely also the power of the Didnt family. Before that, do I have to turn into an invisible third party and wait for his favor after enduring humiliation? The weather has become even colder than when I first came. Cherry seemed satisfied only then. She put her arm around his and smiled. She walked to the front passenger seat and pointed at me arrogantly. You, get in the back. And I, looking at Stephen, had no change in expression from the beginning. Leo only then noticed their side. TSK. He put his arm around my shoulder. What's all this crap? Finally meeting a Chinese in a foreign land, and still spewing vulgarities when speaking. Was this person let out before finishing 9 years of compulsory education? I stiffened for a moment. When I realized it, the smile on my face couldn't be restrained for a moment. Those long-suppressed feelings of humiliation and despair were instantly broken. I laughed until tears came out. Cherry was furious. What are you? Your family must have emptied their savings for you to go to school here, right? You wretch. At this moment, Stephen seemed to finally recognize Leo's identity and hugged Cherry tightly. You are that kid from the Lynn family? You are that ungrateful white-eyed wolf? Leo didn't hold back at all. Oh, no. You were blind for 3 years. After regaining your sight, it's better to be blind. You're not even as good as a white-eyed wolf. The two sides were about to start a quarrel. I grabbed Leo's arm. But unexpectedly, this guy immediately leaned over and stuck close to my shoulder, overly grabbing my finger. Young Master Gu, I'm not very free. I still have a group discussion class at night. I forcibly resisted the urge to shake him off and looked at Stephen. Thank you for your invitation. But please believe that when I took care of you for 3 years, I had no other intentions. It's you who misunderstood me. When I said this, I tried hard to keep my eyes open and not let the slightest bit of moisture well up. I pinched Leo's finger. I must have pinched him hard. Sorry, I have to go eat. I wish you both well. I clearly saw that at the moment we passed by each other, Stephen's face suddenly turned pale. I don't know if it was the sentence "it's you who misunderstood me" that made him panic, or if Leo's appearance made him angry. I just suddenly felt that this person somehow made me feel disgusted. At night, I received another application message. My mother is very reassured of me now. Mia, regarding Andy's matter, I am in charge now. For a moment, I was almost so angry that I could jump up on the spot. Forcibly suppressing my humiliation and anger, I replied, Stephen, don't be cheap. Don't forget that I also have Mrs. Gu's contact information. What you got can also be spit out completely. He finally calmed down. This night, I was in a turmoil and didn't dare to contact my mother. I remembered those years when I was studying in college. The school I attended was not the top one, but I studied desperately and won various honors, all for the sake of being recommended to a top graduate school in the end or easily passing the opportunity to study abroad. Gu asked me to go to Australia. After getting through this day, maybe everything will be fine. My mother coughed violently. I took the prescription and went downstairs to buy medicine. Staring at the report of the century engagement banquet of the Gu family and the Didnt family on TV, my heart was like being cut by a knife. With a wry smile, I turned and entered the alley, but was knocked unconscious by a blow from a club. When I woke up, Kevin was smoking while wearing only a bath towel and making a phone call. Auntie, are you sure? Does your son really have no feelings for this woman? Aren't you afraid that you're breaking up a loving couple? He glanced at me sideways. Even when he saw that I was awake, he was still fearless. Instead, he felt even more excited. You and Stephen are brothers and rivals. Whether he loves Mia or not doesn't matter. In any case, he can't love her. Since you like her, then I'll leave her to you. You also help me test whether Ting really has no feelings for her. I understood everything. These lunatics. I couldn't help shaking all over and instinctively begged for mercy. I'll listen to you. I'll go to Australia. Don't let him come over now. Mia. This is just a test. My days of escape were just like a clown acting under her watch. Oh, brother, are you busy? Look who this is. Kevin laughed maliciously and turned on the video. In the picture, Stephen was in a suit and was having his tie tied by someone else. I rushed over and snatched the phone. Stephen, save me. Your mother in my panic, I didn't care about any dignity. No matter how ugly the world is, it has nothing to do with me. I want to live well first. The tall man glanced here indifferently and finally chuckled. After restraining himself a little, he said softly, the choice my mother gave you is already very good. I know everything. Mia, if you still don't understand, then I'll say one last thing to you. You and Kevin are quite a match. I mean, in terms of status. Following him may be the best ending for you, even better than going to Australia. Sorry, Mia. I was good to you when we were kids. When we grow up, you should also learn some truths. Mia. Goodbye. This is the most words Stephen has said to me since he regained his sight. It's not a cold sarcasm, but it's more like a sharp weapon than any words before, piercing my heart. The snatched phone fell to the ground. Kevin swallowed hard, hung up the phone and pounced on me. I closed my eyes. These were the 10 seconds when I felt the coldest to the bone. The door was opened. Mrs. Gu, who was always proud and noble, appeared in front of me and said indifferently, "That's enough." That day, the weather was extremely fine. In the evening, an hour before the engagement banquet started, the sunset glow in the high sky outside the hotel window was as red as fire. Wouldn't it be better to go to Australia obediently early like this? For your mother's illness, the medicine will be taken care of by me from now on. This night, I just came back to complete a task. The most important thing is that I want to see my mom. After the wedding ended as expected, when I was about to leave, the bodyguard stopped me. "Miss Ming, you can't leave until tomorrow morning." I was confused for a moment. After a while, I burst out laughing sarcastically. "Are you afraid that on the wedding night, Stephen will still appear on my bed? These people can think one more absurdly than the other, and one more despises me than the other. It doesn't matter. After the wedding is over, there is nothing left to hold me back. I'll wait." Until dawn was breaking, my heart suddenly skipped a beat and there was an extra beat. Subconsciously, I contacted the previous caregiver, the nurse on duty for ward rounds and the attending physician, but no one replied to me. I wasn't unable to contact them just at this moment, but I suddenly felt extremely frightened and panicked. After the bodyguard finally let me go, I didn't even change my clothes and directly rushed to the hospital. "Where's my mom?" Out of breath, I stared at the empty bed and asked in confusion. A nurse I knew grabbed the new intern, rushed up to me with pain in her eyes, pulled me over and said, "Miss Ming, I finally see you. Your mother. She suddenly fell seriously ill a week ago and was taken to Lishan Hospital for rescue. When she came back, she was already. I heard from my colleagues there that it was caused by complications, and when she was found, it was already in the late stage. Of course, after the power was restored that night, it was also because our caregiver was not attentive enough. That person has already run away." For a moment, I could only see her mouth opening and closing. I couldn't hear anything anymore. "Dead? My mom, she passed away? The body is in the morgue. Mrs. Goose said not to tell you and give it to you after the wedding is completed." The little nurse seemed to have pity on her face and comforted me. "Your mother's body is still well preserved." I bent down, and my whole heart ached so much that I could hardly breathe. Tears seemed to have lost their switch and dropped on the ground in big drops. I forced out a few words. "Take me to see." Mrs. Gu came very quickly. She should have been at home waiting for her daughter-in-law to serve tea. But now she has changed into a white cheongsam early and come here in the wind and snow. She pursed her lips, stretched out her hand and placed it on my shoulder, and said softly, "I was thinking that I did my best for your mother's illness. It was the people below who were not thorough in doing things that caused an accident. It was also because of her own poor health. It doesn't make any difference if you know it 1 or 2 days later. Of course, Aunt is still sorry." She blinked her beautiful eyes, took a card from the servant and handed it to me. 6 million. "Mia, I didn't mean not to tell you. But if you knew this and disrupted the wedding, I don't know what Tinger would do. Aunt can't take such a risk. You can understand me. It's all for the children, right? I'm sorry about Tinger's matter and your mother's matter." I tightly grasped the railing and looked at the person I loved the most in this life lying quietly in front of me. I couldn't describe the hatred exploding in my heart at this moment. I wanted to tear this woman in front of me. "Get out." Mrs. Gu was stunned. It seemed that she couldn't imagine that I would talk to her in such a tone at all. The people below were anxious to settle scores with me. She smiled, stopped them and said softly, "Mourn in peace. At this time, I won't take it to heart with you. Get out." I said it even faster. It seemed that the sky would never brighten. I was really afraid that my mom had been lying there for too long. After holding her for a while, I was already completely cold. With trembling hands and feet, I covered her up, contacted the crematorium and took her there. Chinese people pay attention to being buried in peace. But she had been waiting for me for so many days for no reason. The soul will be restless. I followed the car. After everything was settled, there was only one more box in my hand. I sat under the eaves on foot. Everything was quiet. The sunlight spread slowly. And the person I loved the most left this world. Holding the box, I finally reacted and burst into loud sobs. I clearly know that she was really very sick. It was really not easy for her to survive these 6 months. This is already very good. But I can't forgive myself for not being by her side at the last moment. If I had been taking care of her, maybe the accident wouldn't have happened and there wouldn't have been negligence. Why on earth did I fall in love with Stephen? Why did we come to this point? The snow started to fall again. A person staggered over, full of disbelief. It took a long time to understand what had happened. Stephen slowly knelt down and said hoarsely, "I just found out too. My mom. She hid it from everyone. Mia. Have I lost you?" It took me a long time to calm down. I looked at him. "Stephen, why do you despise us so much? Look down on us so much? Is it just because I don't know what's good for me and dare to like you?" If I had known that the sin of liking him could be so heavy, I would definitely travel back in time and slap that myself awake hard. Looking at my cold eyes, Stephen was panicked for the first time. So panicked that he didn't know which one of his hands and feet should move first. No. Mia, in those 3 years of blindness, no one was truly good to me except you. I was thinking that when I had all the power in my hands, no one could stop us from being together anymore. My mom has such a strong desire for control. She doesn't allow me to have the slightest thought. I really love you. I didn't mean it to be like this. Mia. Don't go, okay? He rushed up and hugged me tightly. My eyes hurt terribly. I slowly pushed him away and was an arm's length away from him. Love me? Everyone is so bad to you. Even your mom treats you like an object. When it's broken, she gives up on you. In those 3 years, it was me who was by your side. Stephen, you may not have really loved me at that time. You confessed to me only because you were afraid that I would run away and leave you alone like others. So you seduced me and gave me a little sweetness. Later, when you regained your sight. Don't you know how others treated me because of your attitude? Don't you know how your mother treated me? Don't you know that you, this beast, are repaying kindness with ingratitude? You just don't care. You are high-sounding. You want it all. You only love yourself. Love me? Are you worthy? I backed away. Stephen chased after me. I roughly shook him off and gave him a resounding slap. Tears fell and covered my entire face. But there is no time in my life when I feel more powerful than now. Stephen, not only am I leaving. We are not just over. Mia, will do my best to climb up in this life. Climb to the highest place and watch how you and your mother fall. You just wait for me. In the dawn, a figure ran towards me from afar. He looked at the two of us in shock. Then he followed my steps. He didn't dare to snatch the things in my hand. Instead, he opened an umbrella for me to block the snow. Behind me, Stephen followed for a few steps. Finally, with red eyes, he knelt on the ground. Whether he called my name or not, I couldn't hear it anymore. When I regained consciousness, there was already a thick layer of snow on top of the umbrella. The young man beside me had dyed his hair back to black. His features were even more distinct. Sensing my gaze, he looked back at me. Sister, don't be sad anymore. 18 my brother, do you know? His name is Ryan. I sat on the bench in a daze and listened, without any expression. No one wouldn't know the name Ryan. At the age of 20, he was on the rich list. He has a promising future. Only then did I realize that his Lin family is actually that Lin family. And he is actually Ryan's younger brother. Leo leaned back and spread his arms. Our family was really a model family. My brother is so excellent. Actually, I just need to enjoy the benefits following behind him. But at the age of 21, on this street, it seems to be at this time point too. He had an attack and rushed onto the road. He was hit by a car and died on the spot. The young man looked at me. His extremely good-looking eyebrows and eyes were tinged with a cold smile. A genetic inherited disease. He didn't have an attack until he was over 20. How unfair. He is such a proud person and can't accept being sick. So later, he went crazy and hurt people every day. Not long after he left, my mother also left. Some people think that I, Leo, will be the next favored one. But soon, there came another brother in my family who is even older than me. Why do these rich people love to prepare Plan B so much? My father originally loved me quite a bit. But once, I heard him say to someone that this disease is genetically inherited in the family. I don't have it, but my future children will. So, I am destined not to be the one to be cultivated. In order to grasp the last bit of warmth in life, I made troubles desperately and wanted him to look at me more. I shouted in my heart and wanted him to love me more. But I messed up. He is more and more disappointed in me. So everyone says that when Ryan left, half of the Lin family collapsed. He is my sky. When he left, my sky will never shine again. Looking at him, for a moment, I was at a loss for words and didn't know at all how to comfort him. The young man lowered his head and leaned close to me. His eyes were as bright as stars. He said clearly word by word, I felt that my life was ruined since then. I have been rotting. Later, one day, I met you. I was like seeing a plant regarded as a weed growing wildly and struggling desperately for survival in the crevice. I just think. She is so amazing. She is like a beam of light. I want to chase after her. Sure enough, her story is so tragic, but she is so strong. Sister, don't be sad anymore. I will always, always be with you. It turns out that sometimes, what knocks on others' hearts is not necessarily very moving words. I burst into tears. I felt someone hugging me tightly. And I hugged the box in my arms tightly. I can finally say goodbye to all this absurdity. But it's impossible to realize what I said to my mother about spending the new year together this year. After returning to Australia, I was in a slump for about a week. One day a week later, I knocked on Leo's door. The young man rubbed his sleepy eyes. When he saw me coming, he was so scared that he hurriedly looked for clothes. Finally, he shyly let go of his hand covering his chest and scratched his head. Well, it's so early. Isn't it a bit inappropriate? I was speechless and softly uttered, I have applied for a school in the UK. I will transfer with my grades in a week. Leo, if you want to follow me, apply together. I can tutor you. Otherwise, just pretend I didn't come and I didn't say anything. Which school? He was confused. Edinburgh, sister, I can't apply even if I die. He couldn't believe it. Oh, then consider this as my farewell. No, no, no. The young man was visibly flustered. It's okay. Wait for me, Mia. I will follow you even if I die. For a whole month, Leo was studying under my guidance. I handled all the transfer procedures and materials. But after finishing, I would tell him where to pay attention. I am his shortcut indeed, but I also have to be his teacher. Leo habitually pursed his lips and was a bit frustrated. Sister, if you are like this, I won't be able to catch up with you. I looked at him and couldn't help but rub his hair for a moment. You still have to chase. Otherwise, how could I like you? The light in the young man's eyes flashed instantly. He directly leaned over to ask for a kiss. I slapped his face and turned it to the other side. Time passed quickly. We soon left for Edinburgh. After completing a one-year master's degree in mathematics, I decisively applied to the business school of a U.S. university. When Leo found out, he was so angry that he directly lay down on the grass and shouted that he was exhausted. His major is still relatively easy compared to mine. Every time he saw me staring at a large number of curves on my phone, he would shout that his head hurt. Leo, if you lose 50% on stocks today, then tell me, how much does it need to rise tomorrow so that you can make it back? I encouraged him. As long as you learn mathematical thinking, your father won't look down on you anymore. 50%? 100%. In his shocked and sad eyes, I laughed and began to calculate for him seriously. Time flies. We are almost inseparable. I only focus on growing. As for everything in China, I am too lazy to listen. The only 3 months when I was separated from Leo. He went on a business trip to the UK, while I was managing a project in New York. No one expected that the sudden plague would sweep the world. When I felt a sore throat, it was already too late. I drove home, bought all the medicines and ingredients I could buy, and locked myself up. The hospitals were in total chaos. Tourists could no longer return to their home countries. While watching the domestic news every day, I felt that my illness was getting more and more serious, but I thought that I still had to finish the project at hand first. At that dusk, there was a loud banging on the door. With a nasal voice, I asked warily, "Who is it?" The breathing sound at the door slowed down. "It's me. Mia, open the door." I widened my eyes. "I told you I was sick. Why did you come back? It's safer over there for you." There was no time to be angry. I put on a mask and scolded, "This thing is transmitted through aerosols. Even a door can't block it. Why don't you leave quickly? TSK. Do you open the door or do I kick it open? Do you have medicine or food? Open the door. No. You go away." A sudden panic rose in my heart. I knew exactly what would happen if he came in. I would never allow it. This is not a stable and prosperous era. A few years later. In the first 2 years when the disease was raging, this disease could easily kill people. Then I'll kick it. The sound of kicking the door got louder and louder. I was terrified. "Leo, you're crazy. I taught you not to expect anything from you." I opened the door and scolded angrily. The teenager's hair was dyed chestnut again. It was more beautiful than ever before. He grumbled and withdrew his foot, then rushed forward, held my face and kissed me. "Mia, you're going against me. I'm your man. I'll die with you even if I have to. I am a sick person." After struggling in vain. In the scorching air, the teenager's kiss came towards me with the courage of recklessness and rebirth after death. I had never felt such a passionate and unreserved love. "I am also an ordinary person." After softening in his arms, at first he couldn't believe it. Then he realized and started to go crazy. Leo got up, took off his shirt, and hugged me. "Sister. Are you serious?" I was dazed and murmured, I have a fever of 39 degrees. "Leo, do you want to try a girlfriend with a fever of 39 degrees? He froze, then held me tightly and cried, "No, I'll try when I have a fever of 40 degrees. Mia, you must be very uncomfortable." "Well, I am very touched. Leo is naturally not made of iron." Soon he also got sick. On the day when the medicine ran out, he came back triumphantly from outside, holding a full load of supplies and medicine in his hand. "Hey, do you think we're doomed? I have someone in China, who flew over personally to give it to me." That night, Leo had a fever of 40 degrees. He rushed over impatiently and rained kisses. "Mia, I have a fever of 40 degrees. We agreed to try it. Sister. Sister. I love you." 3 years later. At the airport. Leo went to pick up his luggage as soon as he got off the plane and asked me to wait here. This time, Leo came back because of Father Lin's summons. For me, it was because there was a gene therapy project that needed to be sampled in China. It was very simple because there were a large number of population samples in China. Unexpectedly, after a low murmur of discussion, 2 acquaintances would stand in front of me. After several years of turmoil, Mrs. Gu showed a little sign of aging. Not in appearance, but from the inside out, showing a bit of exhaustion. I understand. Stephen's relationship with Cherry was not good after marriage. Coupled with the economic downturn in recent years, many industries disappeared instantly. When a building is about to collapse, no one is spared. Why does that person look so familiar? Mia? The person accompanying Mrs. Gu is Cherry. After the childishness of the girl faded away, she was filled with an inexplicable resentment. Why are you here? What are you doing back? Cherry walked over and said loudly, Mia, I heard that you ran away with a man abroad and went through several countries. Haven't you been sold yet? Does young Master Lin not want you anymore? You are really unlucky. Now he doesn't know what kind of help he has got. He found a risk control expert abroad and was invited back by Uncle Lin and treated like a treasure. Are you green with regret? I think you are destined to be a nanny all your life. After missing one man, you can't even dream of the next one. Mrs. Gu closed her eyes. Cherry, stand still and wait for people. After hearing this, Cherry gave her a fierce look behind her back. Judging from Mrs. Gu's character, over the years, it is estimated that whoever is her child will be greatly wasted. I looked at them indifferently. I wanted to fight back, but for a moment I really didn't know what to say. So I couldn't help but curl my lips and smile. With my left hand on top of my right hand, I continued to wait for Leo. Cherry seemed to see the jade bracelet on my wrist. She looked at me in disbelief. For a long time, she gave a self-mocking smile as if to comfort herself. Presumably, she thought this must be fake. I don't usually like to wear jewelry. This time it was only because I was going back to the Lin family. Leo insisted on putting it on me. He said this was the ancient jade with the highest value that Mrs. Lin had photographed before she died. So I didn't take it off. Mom, why hasn't that person come yet? Did we remember the wrong flight? Are you sure that person can cure him? Shut up. Mrs. Gu took a breath and said with a slightly solemn expression, Cherry, if you see that person, you should be more restrained. Don't be as noisy as when facing Stephen. Just because I don't say it doesn't mean I don't know those things. Cherry was stunned, gritted her teeth, and secretly rolled her eyes fiercely. I have vaguely heard about it. I can guess that Stephen's marriage is not going well. There is also a mother with extremely strong control at home and outside. His irritability and rebellion are bound to happen sooner or later. Baby. Long time no see. I kept you waiting. Leo rushed over. His mouth reached me before his hands. He kissed me hard on the face and then hugged me. He was covered with luggage all over his body. With a smile on his face, he took me and walked out. On the other side, Cherry's mouth was wide open in surprise. Mrs. Gu also had to pay a little attention. After landing, business calls kept coming in. I quickly answered one. Only vaguely heard a sentence coming from behind. I didn't expect to be in a higher position. This is like taking a concubine's position. Not simple. 23 There are multiple parties attending the banquet in the evening. I was late. After changing clothes, I was taken over. It was said that Chairman Lin had been waiting for me for a long time. Sure enough, when I entered the door, I saw Cherry and Mrs. Gu in the crowd again. When Chairman Lin came up to greet me, Cherry muttered, "Why can she still meet the parents? Shouldn't this kind of woman be hidden?" Miss Ming. Chairman Lin is well maintained and one can see his charm when he was young. At this time, he is active but not obsequious. My son has been taken care of by you when he is abroad. It is my fault as a father, but it is also my son's honor. Not at all. I replied politely. Unable to resist, I stared into his eyes and added, Wei Yang is indeed excellent. Father Lin was taken aback for a moment and then burst out laughing in a mature and official manner. When I sensed a familiar presence approaching, it was already too late. Stephen, whom I hadn't seen for a full 3 years, emerged from somewhere. His deep eyes were tinged with a hint of turbidity as he stood in front of me. Mia. I pursed my lips, raised my glass and smiled at him before walking away. But Cherry suddenly popped out. As if afraid that no one would know, she launched into a tirade against Stephen. Stephen, you can't even be bothered to look at me at home. But as soon as you come out, you start flirting? And you can flirt with anyone. But this is the mistress that young Master Lin keeps outside. He is ignorant and brings her to show off in front of people. Are you also ignorant? Are you smelling wildflowers in front of your wife? Cherry's words were extremely harsh. Stephen's face changed instantly and he turned to look at her stiffly. You are simply crazy. Am I as crazy as you? Cherry exploded when she heard this. She threw a glass of wine in his face and then slapped him hard. Raising her voice, she said, "You couldn't even see an extra zero in the contract you signed last night, causing our family to lose 10 million. Are you blind? Stephen, you married me of your own free will. If you dare to mistreat me and compare me to a bitch like Mia, think about whether you are the crazy one." Amid the uproar spreading around, the wine on Stephen's face dripped down drop by drop. His ferocious expression seemed truly crazy as he stepped forward and grabbed Cherry. The two of them started fighting. I frowned. Before I could do anything, a figure came running from afar and stood firmly in front of me to protect me. So I didn't see how Cherry screamed after her arm was twisted. Then she took off her high heels and hit Stephen on the head. Stephen lost his balance on the steps and fell down. He covered his eyes, growling ferociously. The banquet was in chaos. 24 The news of Stephen's blindness again spread quickly. Although the Gu family promptly refuted the rumors still spread. I held the report in my hand. At this moment, a wave of emotion suddenly spread in my heart. I couldn't tell what it was like. I just felt that there was actually a hint of satisfaction. Outside the door, my assistant knocked. "Miss Ming, someone is looking for you outside and wants to add an experimental spot. She also said that she might know you." I was stunned for a moment and walked out. It was actually Mrs. Gu. This elegant lady from a wealthy family, although her face was pale at this time, still stood in front of me with an air of nobility and arrogance. When she saw it was me, her expression seemed to be shaken visibly. Finally, she let out a breath and relaxed into a smile. "I didn't know that you are the investor of this genetic research project." Mia, Stephen's illness wasn't completely cured at that time. In the past 2 years, the economy hasn't been good and he has been overly worried, so it relapsed. Your research project is just targeted at him. Remove one of the spots that has already been booked and arrange it for him as soon as possible. The conference room hadn't been this quiet for a long time. My team members were outside, discussing in Chinese or English in whispers, wondering who this person was and why she spoke to me so naturally and rudely. I didn't have too many emotions either. Although I hated them very much at that time is long and I always have many things I want to do. In the face of those things in the future, I suddenly understood that they were all just insignificant grains of sand. Mrs. Gu was dissatisfied and gave me a cold look. "Why? Since you are the investor, do you still want me to beg you?" I put down the report and went to make coffee. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. "Mrs. Gu, but why should I?" "For you and your mother," I gave. But as she spoke, her expression changed slightly, as if she finally remembered what she had done to our mother and daughter. "Yes, 6 million. I put down the coffee and looked at her directly. "I donated most of it and gave the rest to the media. After I left back then, the Gu family played with power, were ungrateful, and casually found a rich young lady to marry into the family. After the matter was calmed down, it was dug up again with conclusive evidence. Do you still remember? I did it." Mrs. Gu's face finally began to show cracks. She couldn't believe it. "You? Me? I said that I would watch you fall with my own eyes." Stephen's eyes, in my opinion, deserve to be blind. "Mrs. Gu, not to mention that all the spots in our project are for extremely serious and highly representative patients. Even if not, I would rather destroy it than give it to him. 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 Destroy it than give it to him."